Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. This morning, with less than 2 weeks to go to the general election, we are spoiling you because we've got not just one, but two Scottish party leaders on the programme for you. Of course, we will ask them both why they want your votes, and I'll be exploring their campaigns and their manifesto commitments. First up, Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar. He's here with me in the studio. His party, of course, riding high in the polls. What difference would a Westminster Labour government really make to voters' lives here in Scotland? Then it is on to the Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross. And with senior Westminster Tories seemingly resigned to defeat now, how is he going to persuade voters here not to show his party the red card? After all that, it is over to Fiona on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Hi, Fiona.
Hi, Martin. We'll get reaction to those leader interviews from our panel and crunch the numbers with our resident pollster. And, of course, it is make or break day for Scotland. We'll be live in Stuttgart ahead of that crucial Hungary game. We'll speak to fans heading to the match from 11:15.
Excellent. Excitement building. We will speak to you at 11:15. Thanks for that, Fiona. Good to have you with us this morning. Let's get on with the programme. Yes, we are almost there. The big moment is almost upon us. Less than 10 hours to go till kick-off in Scotland. No, just 11 days till we finally get a chance to vote in this massive democratic exercise we're all so excited about. What have you made of the campaign so far? And what are you going to make of what you hear from our leaders this morning? Whatever you're thinking, why don't you share it with us? The conversation is already underway on social media. The hashtag is, as ever, BBC Sunday Show. And by the way, if you are watching this on the television this morning, don't worry, the sky has not gone black. Our studio is a bit darker than normal this morning because we blacked out the roof windows here as part of our preparations for our election results programme overnight on the 4th of July. So, to the election and those campaigns. Gags galore from the Liberal Democrats, gaffes galore from the Tories. But have people been paying attention? Has an election that's battling the Euros, the school holidays, and, as of next week, Wimbledon for attention, actually managed to cut through it all? The only big mover in the polls so far, really, has been the Reform Party after Nigel Farage entered the fray. Well, joining me now to assess the very latest polling data is the pollster, Mark Diffley. Hi, Mark. Welcome back to the programme.
Morning, Martin.
So, listen, just take us through the picture this week. What's happened since we spoke to you last? It seems to depend on which pollster you look at, right?
Yeah, very much. I think the big picture UK-wide is that Labour maintains its, on average, 20 percentage point lead over the Tories. During the course of the campaign, both parties have lost a bit of support, both down by about 3 percentage points, but because both parties have lost support, Labour maintains its lead overall. I think, as you mentioned there, the big story is reform, and in particular, I think when we look back on the campaign, the decision by Nigel Farage to stand as a candidate and to lead the Reform Party has been one of the big moments of the campaign in polling terms. And what it means is that although one or two polls have put Reform ahead of the Tories in terms of the number of votes cast and in second place, the big picture is that most polls still show them behind the Tories, but now pushing up to about 17% on average, which is, you know, quite some achievement, really. It won't mean that they get loads of seats, but it does mean that they will probably deprive the Conservatives of a lot of seats.
Yeah, I mean, looking at that, actually, that's really interesting, the number of seats, because the Liberal Democrats, for example, could get fewer votes than Reform, but end up with dozens and dozens of seats, high 40s maybe even. Reform, who get more votes, could end up with just a fraction of that, a handful at most, right? Yeah,
that's absolutely correct. And the Lib Dems are, you know, seasoned campaigners at putting their resources into areas where they know they have a track record of success. So their vote is very concentrated around the south, and particularly the southwest of England, which means that that's where they will pick up most seats, whereas the Reform vote is much more spread out. Now, depending on which of these big mega polls that you look at, Reform might not win any seats, but it may win, I don't know, four or five, including Mr Farage's seat, and maybe sort of 2 or 3 others. But you're right, there is, despite the fact that the national vote share for Reform is 5 or 6 points ahead of the Lib Dems will significantly outperform reform in terms of the number of seats, and that is again a vagary of the first past the post system.
Yeah, let's look now, Mark, if we can, at the Scottish specific picture. What's the data telling you up here?
Well, again, as with the UK-wide polls, nothing particularly has changed during the campaign. It's really interesting. Quite often we expect polls to narrow during the campaign, whether that's here in Scotland or UK-wide, and it simply hasn't happened this time. Labour nationally in Scotland is about, on average, 4 points ahead of the SNP. The SNP, since Mr Swinney has become First Minister, he has I think steadied the ship somewhat, as in the decline in support for the SNP hasn't continued unabated. It has steadied at around 31, 32%, but Labour does still have the advantage.
And what about our two guests this morning, and that's Sarwar, who's just walking onto the set beside me now, and Douglas Ross, who's going to be joining us later. How are they doing in terms of popularity? I
think Anas will be pretty pleased with how the campaign has gone so far. I think maintaining a 4-point lead is good news for Labour. As far as Anas's personal popularity is concerned, the latest polling on that suggests he's slightly less popular than John Swinney, the First Minister, but still about 4 in 10 say that he's doing a good job. I think the big thing for Anas Sarwar is will the SNP voters that have come over to Labour during this campaign stay with Labour as we go into the 2026 Holyrood campaign? That's the great unknown at the moment, but that is certainly something that to keep an eye on after the dust settles on the general election. As for Douglas Ross, I think it's a bit more difficult at this stage. Tory support now, on average, in Scotland is around 14–15%, which is 10 percentage points down on their achievement at the general election. Clearly, he's the only one of the leaders in Scotland who's actually fighting a seat, which gives an extra dynamic for him. And not only that, but it's likely to be a very closely fought seat between the Tories and the SNP. So he's having to juggle his time between, facing up the Tory campaign as the leader in Scotland while fighting a highly marginal seat up there in the northeast.
Yeah, we will hear from him about how successfully he is juggling all of that in about half an hour's time. Mark Diffley, thank you as ever. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thanks,
time
Mark.
now, though, for the first of today's Scottish party leader interviews. And as you can see, joining me in the studio is the Scottish Labour leader, Anas Sarwar. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin.
What's the point in voting Labour at this election? If the polls are to be believed, you're going to run away with this. Why shouldn't people vote for a party who are actually going to keep you in check? Avoid this supermajority people are talking about. Hold your feet to the fire.
Well, first of all, it's nonsense to even suggest there'll be a supermajority. Not a single vote has been cast. Well, I suppose postal ballots have been cast, but we still don't have any results from this election. And every vote for Scottish Labour in this election is, of course, to make sure we get rid of the Tories, but it's also to put Scotland at the heart of a Labour government and to deliver the change our country needs. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Is we have a choice in Scotland. We can either elect MPs that are going to sit in the opposition benches, shout, protest, but ultimately come back with nothing, or we can elect Scottish Labour MPs that will sit around the table, help make decisions and change their own communities, Scotland and the UK for the better. And that's an opportunity Scotland can't afford to miss.
Right, but you're saying you don't believe the polls that we just heard. The supermajority's off the cards, this massive 200-seat majority where they're suggesting...
What I'd say is, in 11 days' time, the Tories could be gone. In 11 days' time, we could wake up to the news, or at least have the opportunity to go out and vote, and then on the 5th of July, wake up to the news that Rishi Sunak and this whole rotten Tory government that's done so much damage to Scotland and the UK over the last 14 years have gone, and we can start the journey of change with a Labour government. And that's something that excites me, enthuses me. It seems the only people depressed about that thought are, of course, the Tories, but perhaps even more so John Swinney and the SNP.
Well, listen, let's talk about you and your campaign then, and what your party would do if it did get the privilege of government. You've been in the studio many times over the past year or so, and every time you've been in, you've said to me you would not you would not increase tax, you wouldn't cut more, you would grow the economy. And now your manifesto's been published, and I'm afraid to say I'm none the wiser, really, as to how you would plan to do that. Are you any wiser as to what the big plan is?
I'm happy to set out the detail for you on this show, Martin. Let's look at where the huge potential lies, in particular for Scotland's economy, and then what that means for the wider UK economy. It's clear where our priorities lie is, one, maximising the opportunities of the Green Revolution. Secondly, digital innovation in tech, which is going to be so important for our economy, but also delivery of our public services. And third is brand Scotland and tourism. And if you look at each of those in turn, let's look at the huge energy potential.
Yeah, let's stick on that.
GB Energy,
right.
a publicly owned energy company that will be headquartered right here in Scotland, making billions of pounds in investments. Yes, and for example, things like onshore wind, offshore wind, hydrogen, carbon capture storage, solar, tidal, so much more. But also, crucially, where the big, large-scale jobs come from is investing, first of all, in our port infrastructure, but also in our supply chains. Because right now what's happening is we're producing all this, all these components are coming in. Yes, we're putting up the wind turbines, but actually the large-scale jobs is in the manufacturing side of it. And right now those jobs aren't in Scotland, they are in the UK.
But
bring those jobs to Scotland and the UK, and that's huge growth potential.
Let's clear up one area of confusion over this GB Energy idea of yours. Is it an energy company or is it an investment vehicle, a venture capital organisation? Well, will it create power itself?
Well, I'm happy to clarify this because I think only a set number of people are deliberately confused.
Well, Keir Starmer seemed to be confused when he came up and launched it, didn't he? He said it wasn't going to create energy.
No, not at all. If you look at what generates energy, it's wind turbines that generate energy, it's hydrogen that generates energy, it's solar and tidal that generates energy, that's the water, that's the sun. It's not actually those that invest that generate the energy, so we will make the investments in the offshore wind, onshore wind, which will be investments, for example, in the turbines. Those turbines will then generate energy that will produce a profit. And the fruits of that profit won't go to Norway, won't go to Denmark to fund their public services. The fruits of that profit will stay here in Scotland and the UK.
But GB Energy will give money to other companies to generate energy.
It's really important. Right? Those investments, those profits, would then help to bring down people's bills, of course, but also help grow our economy, help create more jobs, but it'll also help deliver energy security as well as generate the income for us to make even more investments to go further and faster in that clean energy transition.
That's the consequence.
And then hopefully one day also be in a position where it can invest in our public services.
That's
because
fine.
Of what it's generating.
That's the consequence, you say, but I think there is still some confusion over the mechanics, how it's going to operate. It will not generate energy of its own. It will give money to other private companies that will generate energy. And here's the reason for my question. What if they don't get it right?
But Mark, what I'm saying to you is, I don't think anybody out there thinks that somehow myself or Keir Starmer or Ed Miliband is on a bike trying to turn a wind turbine. They understand that what we're doing is setting up GB Energy, backed up with the UK Treasury, making billions of pounds of investment directly here in Scotland, right across the UK, into projects that will generate energy, generate a profit, which allows us to make even more investments. Well, I think people will understand that. I don't think anyone thinks that somehow it's individual politicians that are going to try and generate energy.
Well, I tell you where people who, if they're really watching this story and are interested in how energy works, may be confused. We paid, I think, what, £320 million last year to companies that own wind farms in Scotland in compensation. I told them to stop turning their turbines because we're creating so much energy at times that the grid can't cope.
Yes, absolutely.
So how many billion pounds have you allocated to improving the national grid?
Well, a really important point, because there's two big barriers, I think, for us to realise our energy ambition. I actually don't think there's a shortage of money. I think there's lots of people that want to invest in the clean energy of the future here in Scotland. But what the barriers to that investment are is, first of all, having a government that's going to stick to the plan, not change the strategy every 5 minutes, but also aren't climate deniers like we have with Rishi Sunak and the Tories. So that's what you'll get with the Labour.
They would say they're not climate deniers.
That's what you'll get with a Labour government, is a fixed strategy, in it for the long haul. And the reason why GB Energy matters is because we will put government skin in the game. By having government skin in the game, we think we can attract even more private investment. Those people will then have the confidence. It's not a government that's going to run away because they have got skin in the game.
It's your job to upgrade the grid, though, to allow it to cope with these turbines.
And secondly, so that's one, provide the confidence so people make the investments. And then the two big parts, I think, which are the huge barriers that we have to break down. One is grid infrastructure. And to put that into context, we have to upgrade the grid over the next 6 years by the same amount we have upgraded over the last 50 years.
How much will that cost?
And that's tens of billions of pounds. But that's why by changing the way we do the grid, how we manage the grid, we can get investments from the private sector into that grid infrastructure because people can realise the huge potential.
How many?
And the second part, is planning. The second part is planning.
Okay.
Because I've lost count of the number of projects people I've spoken to where they said, we thought about this project 10 years ago. 15 years ago, but it's only now coming to fruition.
Okay.
That is not an acceptable place for us to be. So create stability, create confidence, stick to the strategy, put skin in the game from a UK government with GB Energy headquartered right here in Scotland, reform how we do grid management infrastructure, change our planning system so we can get this done faster, and that means lower bills for good.
OK, you've said that already. Let me just nail you down on some of the detail here. Tens of billions of pounds required for the infrastructure, tens of billions of pounds to upgrade the grid. How many tens? What's the figure? And where's it coming from?
We'll set that out in more detail, of course.
Do you know the figure?
Look, I'm not going to give you the figure off the top of my head.
Well, GB Energy, you've been the panacea. It's the keystone to growth. You've been talking about it for a year.
Yes, but
you must know whether or not these turbines are going to be able to create the energy to go into our homes to bring down our bills.
If you're asking me a question about GB Energy and what capitalisation looks like with GB Energy, that's a very different question. GB Energy is going to be investing in the output, and that means, as I said, supply chains, port infrastructure, onshore wind, offshore wind. Attracting investment in the grid is a separate part. So there's a few.
But you don't know how, because the grid is the problem here. The grid can't cope with the energy that's being created now. Never mind more energy, more turbines.
Yeah, grid is one part of the problem. Planning is also part of the problem, and stability and confidence.
But you don't know how much improvement the grid needs.
I've just said to you, we need to build in 6 years. I've just said to you, we need to build in 6 years what we built in the last 50 years, and we've got a plan to make that happen.
Where's the money coming from?
As I've said to you, there is no shortage of people, for example, in the private sector, that are willing to invest.
So private investors are going to improve the grid?
Of course we need private sector investment. Let's be really upfront about it. The way the public finances are right now, because of the economic carnage of the Conservative Party, we are going to have to create stability.
Which private companies are going to write you a cheque for tens of billions of pounds for grid infrastructure, for the national benefit?
Well, Martin, I don't understand the premise of the question. If you look at what's happening around our ScotWind project, that is private companies that are paying tens of billions of pounds to invest in
for
that
profits that they'll get directly back into their own coffers, to their own shareholders.
Well, exactly, which is why we're setting up GB Energy. So we're making the investments in partnership with them so we get some of the money back. Because right now what's happening is you've got publicly owned companies, but they're just not publicly owned by people in Scotland or across the UK. Okay. So right now, it's stronger for Norway, stronger for Indonesia in terms of if you look at some of the components that are being built. I want those components built here in Scotland and the UK. I want those investments made by Scotland and the UK so we get the fruits of the profits, we can make the investments, we can lower people's bills, we get the jobs, and we then get the long-term growth that we need.
Okay, we will watch that progress with interest. Let's move it on. I do. I'll be watching it like a hawk. Right, what about... let's
I didn't take you as much of a hawk. I always thought you were more of a dove, Martin.
Well, listen, let's move this on. Immigration, another big issue. This is the immigration election, depending on who you speak to. You're a proud Scot, but you're just as proudly from a family who came here as immigrants.
Yep.
How do you feel when you hear the leader of your party say that we have too many people coming into this country?
Well, I'm glad you've asked it in that way, because I think it's really important if we are to take the immigration debate away from the far right, who would seek to divide us, is by having a serious grown-up conversation about immigration. Talking about a managed immigration system isn't pushing to a right-wing agenda. It is what was in the 2014 White Paper, of course. It's what's been in party manifestos for generations. And if you look at what's happening right now across the UK, we have a broken immigration system. We've got a huge asylum backlog, which is doing...
I'm talking about legal immigration just now. We'll get on to that.
Which is doing no favours to those...
What about legal immigration?
But also in terms of legal migration. If you look at legal migration, if you look at net migration across the UK, it is too high. But we have to recognise that there are different migration needs in different parts of the country. And what I think is a real challenge is we can't have a gap between our skilled workforce and our migration system. That's why we've got to bring skills and migration together as one strategy, so we are upskilling our own people in order to take those jobs of the future, rather than missing out on opportunities and relying on cheaper migration, which actually drives down, creates a race to the bottom.
Is legal migration too high? I mean, the Resolution Foundation think tank reckon it's the one thing that's actually allowing us to grow our economy, the tax take from people who are coming in with work visas to work.
Well, there is a fundamental breakdown between our skills system and our migration system, both of which are not working together at the moment, which creates a short-term skills gap, which causes us long-term problems. And that's why we've got to have a managed migration system, but we've also got to have a migration system that meets our needs, our skills need, where our skills gaps are, as well as the investments we need to create the skills here at home. And I don't think we're getting the balance of that right now. I'm really upfront about that.
So what about health and care, for example, in Scotland?
That's a perfect example. So
people come in.
No, so a perfect example is we need migration around our health and social care system? Of course we do. If you look at the social care system, for example, disproportionately people from a migrant background that are coming and working in our health and social care system. But in the longer term, if we are to increase the parity of esteem of working in our health and social care system, if we are to retain as well as attract people in country
but people
to work.
should come into work in that system just now, right?
There's
be helped to come
there's
in
a massive skills gap.
Because it's interesting.
That's why it's been on the shortage occupancy list for a very, very long time.
Well, OK, so last time Sir Keir Starmer sat on that chair, I spoke to him about this, and he specifically, unsolicited, identified the NHS as one area where there are too many foreign people working just now. Is he wrong?
No, what he was talking about was a dependency. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
No, he specifically said we want to cut the number of foreign people working in the NHS.
Well, let me give you an example of that. In a previous role, I was a shadow international development minister, and I was proactively campaigning to say that we are currently, from developing countries, taking their talent, taking their skills in their healthcare system, which is shot to bits, and we're pulling them here. And that is undermining our global health objectives, not just our national ones.
I understand that argument.
No, it's really important. So that's one part. I then became a shadow health secretary in Scotland, who was saying, actually, we have a huge skill shortage and we need to be attracting in the shorter term migrants to fill those posts and then longer term skills.
Well, do you want to see what he said? Hang on, let's have a look at what Sir Keir Starmer said. Let's just, 1 second, look at the plasma screen behind you. We can play you what he said.
No problem. I can see it right there on the screen behind you.
You can see it there. OK, hang on a second. We're just keying up the clip.
What I would like to see is the numbers go down in some areas. I think we're recruiting too many people from overseas into, for example, the health service. But on the other hand, if we need high-skilled people in innovation in tech to set up factories, etc., then I would encourage that. So I don't think there's an overall number here. Some areas we need to go down, other areas we need to go up.
The whole problem with the health service is that it's got a crisis of staffing.
Yes, exactly. And that's why we were able to set out at our conference just a few weeks ago in Liverpool how many more people, 7,500 new people, recruit into and train into the health service from here.
So there you go. He wants the number of foreign workers in the health service to come down. You've just told me you should help people to come in.
No, Martin, you're fundamentally misunderstanding the challenge we currently face in our health and social care system. Of course we have a skill shortage, and right now that means we're over-reliant on migrants to fill that gap.
You just told me we need more people.
No, I've just said to you, we're trying to fill a short-term gap, but how do you sort that? One of the reasons is the pay's not good enough. That's why you're not attracting talent in country to go into health and social care.
Do you agree with what Keir Starmer just said, or do you disagree with it?
I've already said to you, we need to be less reliant on migrants, and that means upskilling your own workforce. Right. That doesn't mean that you stop and you focus on just that, because it takes time to, for example, train nurses, doctors, consultants. But the longer-term way is having a proper workforce plan, something we've not had in Scotland now for well over a decade, a workforce plan, upskilling your own in order to take up those posts. That means partly creating a parity of esteem between health and social care. It's also making sure you recognise that that in itself is a national service, but also improving the pay. Because right now, if we accept health and social care as the big priority for us as a country, as it rightly should be, there are people paid more to work in supermarkets than to work in our social care system. That's not an acceptable place for us to be. So we have to improve the pay, we have to improve the conditions, we have to make it a more attractive place for people to work. We've got to have the skills base in terms of whether that's nursing places, doctor places,
you've made
fill those gaps, rather than purely relying on migration.
Still on the NHS, Wes Streeting has talked about a short-term fix to tackling NHS waiting lists, using the private sector to cut the backlog. Is he right? Would you like to see that in Scotland?
One of the challenges we've got, so I think wherever we can get capacity to bring down our waiting lists, we should do that, because...
Pay private hospitals to do it.
What I'm saying is, if you're on a... Look, take Scotland as an example. 40% of the hip and knee replacements that are happening in Scotland right now are happening in the private sector because of how long the waits are. That's people that are borrowing money from family and friends, people remortgaging their homes in some examples, paying expensive to
why not just spend money on the NHS to allow them to get it done on the NHS?
It's about capacity. The challenge we have, though, in Scotland...
Put the capacity into the NHS. That solves the long-term problem as well as the short-term problem.
But again, it goes back down to the staff base. But let me answer the question, Mark. Is if you look at our challenge, there is capacity. Take London as an example. There is huge capacity available in the private sector which you can buy up to bring down your waiting lists. We don't have the same scale of capacity here in Scotland because there is a much smaller actual private healthcare base here in Scotland, although it's still being used disproportionately highly here in Scotland in terms of 40% of people needing hip and knee replacements. So partly we have to buy up space, but actually more importantly, it's those very same consultants, in many cases, that are working in the NHS as well as supplementing their income by working in the private sector. We have got to encourage...
So you wouldn't want to see it happen in Scotland?
No,
Briefly.
What I'm saying is, yes, we should buy up the space if we can, but we have got to encourage those very same consultants to do that overtime in the NHS rather than privately in order to draw down our waiting list, where 840,000 Scots are on an NHS waiting list struggling to get diagnosis and treatment.
Talking about private things, Rachel Reeves has promised a 20% tax on private school fees, effectively, VAT on private school fees in her first budget, if you get into power. Have you, I mean, let me give you some figures. 4% of the Scottish population go to private schools. 7% of the UK population go to private schools. In Edinburgh, 25% of the pupils are at private schools. Now, I'm sure you know people who send their kids to private schools. I know people who send their kids to private schools. They're all talking about the burden this will have. You must have run the figures. How many kids do you think will fall out of the private school system and into the state school system? Swelling classes there, if this goes ahead.
Well, the most recent statistics I saw actually was the enrolment into private schools has actually gone up over the last year rather than down, counter to much of the scaremongering that's happened over the last year or so on this issue.
You don't think it'll have any impact?
But look, the challenge we have is, we're being really upfront about it, the public finances are shot to bits. We know that. It's been absolutely destroyed by this Tory party. At the same time, our public services are struggling for the resources they need in order for us to take the action we need to see in our schools and our hospitals. So we're going to have to make difficult decisions. And one of those decisions is to remove the VAT exemption that currently exists on private schools in order to put more money into our state schools. And let me give you an example why that's so important. We've got record levels of violence in our state schools. We've got teacher places being cut. The city we're sitting in right now, 173 posts lost this year alone. That could rise to over 400 over the course of the next 3 years.
Increasing pupil numbers in those classes won't solve that, will it?
Well, taking away teachers in those classrooms is not going to solve it. And that's a huge challenge. We are taking teachers away from working class kids' classrooms at the same time as our education standards are falling in the international league tables. That's why we think it's a proportionate thing to do, to remove the VAT exemption so we can give an immediate cash injection into our schools. And at a time when, for example, the number of ASN pupils has more than doubled, whereas we are at a lower level of ASN teachers than we were 10 years ago, I think putting that immediate injection to invest in things like that.
But you think it'll pay for itself? I mean, I don't know, have you just very briefly, because we must move on, but have you done the numbers on how many pupils in Edinburgh you assume will leave private schooling and go into the state sector? Do you think it's a significant number that will do that?
I genuinely believe that it will balance itself out, and that immediate cash injection that we need to see into our state schools is really important.
Talking of young people, you said if you were elected you would have a mission to reduce child poverty. Why is removing the two-child benefit cap not the way to do that?
Well, there's a few ways of doing it. One is making work pay, and that's why we would give an immediate pay rise to over 200,000 Scots, including 40,000 young people. That will lift tens of thousands of children and families out of poverty, and we'll do that.
I'm asking about the two-child benefit cap. Why is that not a good policy?
There's lots of different parts to how you reduce child poverty. One part is making work pay. With the Labour Party, we believe the best route out of poverty is work, and well-paid work. Secondly, is through our education system. That's why we want to see investment.
Sounds like Tory, doesn't it?
No, that's why we're called Labour. The clue is in the name, Martin. Labour means work. We're a party of work, and that's why.
Strivers and all that.
No, that's why we believe in well-paid work, and that's why we'll have the New Deal for working people. But specifically on an important issue of the two-child limit, look, we were right to oppose it. We were right to campaign against it. But we're also being upfront and honest with people, is that we're only including in this manifesto promises we know we can keep.
Well, it's all about choices.
One second, if you let me finish a quick answer. It's also only making spending commitments where we know the money is coming from. But we've all been really clear.
Fine.
This is the first steps. It's not the height of our ambition.
Let me take you on to another spending commitment.
And we want to cut child poverty, and we want to move as fast as possible to remove the two-child limit when the financial circumstances.
It's about choices, though, isn't it? And another spending commitment you've made is to make defence spending 2.5% of the size of our economy. Now, by the end of this Parliament, that's going to cost you an extra £20 billion a year. Removing the two-child benefit cap, by contrast, would cost about £2.4 billion a year. That's just a choice you've made.
Well, two parts. One is we want to move as fast as we can to remove the two-child limit when the economic circumstances improve, and we shouldn't downplay the 14 years of economic damage done by this Conservative Party. But national security is the first priority, rightly, of any government. And when you look at what's happening in Russia, if you look at the aggression of Vladimir Putin, if you look at the alliances that he is looking to build, you can't pretend that we are in a more secure world now than we were a decade ago. We're in a more insecure world.
So that's
and
the
I
choice.
think, and I think
so
absolutely we have got to prioritise national security.
In the couple of minutes we got left, let's talk about independence. You said, you were on the Debate Night Leaders programme, of course, and you said that the decision as to whether or not we should remain in the Union was a matter for the people of Scotland. Sir Keir Starmer came here on Friday and said, with you at his side, no negotiations on independence, even if the SNP win a majority of MPs in Scotland on the 4th of July. So it's actually not a matter for the people of Scotland, is it? It's a matter of your discretion as to when the people of Scotland get a chance to decide on this.
Look, of course it's for the Scottish people to decide, and they have a choice to make on the 4th of July, whether we wake up to 5 more years of the Tories or we start the process of change with a Labour government.
I'm asking you about independence and what the route out of this union is if the people of Scotland choose to take it.
And specifically on independence, we've been really clear in this election campaign. I don't support independence. I don't support a referendum. There isn't a consistent majority for independence. There isn't a majority for a referendum right now.
There was a majority for independence at the last Scottish Parliament elections just a couple of years ago.
I'm happy to relitigate the debate in 2021. I don't think we should use the people's votes in the middle of a pandemic, when many of them were saying thank you and actually are feeling betrayed now by that thank you in a COVID pandemic.
That's a caveat.
In a COVID pandemic.
To a democratic comment.
That was a pandemic election in which people were making a decision.
You can give any election a tag and say it doesn't count. What does the Brexit election not count?
On COVID recovery, and where has been the COVID recovery? Instead, we've had 3 years of utter chaos and division from the SNP. But specifically on the important question is, as I say, we may disagree on the final destination for Scotland, but the vast majority of people in this country want change. They want to get away from this Tory government, and the best way of doing it.
You don't speak on behalf of the people of the country. Let me ask you the really important question.
I hope will speak very loudly on the 4th of July.
I've asked every unionist leader, the leader of every unionist party that sat on that seat, the same question, and nobody's given me a satisfactory answer, I think, or a coherent answer yet. What is, if this union is a voluntary union, the participants in this union can leave if the mood takes them, what is the democratic route out of this union for Scotland if that's what its people decide?
Well, I go by what other people have said in nationalist parties is the settled will of the Scottish people.
So there
is no settled will of the Scottish people. The only thing the Scottish people...
How will you be satisfied they've demonstrated that will, if not by the majority of votes like they did in the last Scottish election?
The only settled will of the people of Scotland is an overwhelming majority for change.
What's overwhelming?
Well, I think if you look at this country, I would imagine over 80% of this country want to get away from this rotten Tory government. And
I'm asking you not about the Tories. I'm asking you about
opportunity to do it.
What do you need to see? What does your party, what does Sir Keir Starmer need to see from the Scottish people? How can they demonstrate that desire in such a way that he will finally say, OK, that's fine, you get a referendum?
But Martin, this is what I'm saying to you is, there is no consistent majority for independence. There is not a majority of people that want a referendum.
What would constitute a sustained majority?
But there is not a majority for the status quo either, but there is an overwhelming majority for change, and on the 4th of July people can vote for that.
I'm not sure we got to the answer there.
To make sure we get rid of the Tories, to put Scotland at the heart of a Labour government, and to deliver that change our country needs.
We still don't know what a sustained majority means. We may revisit this, I'm sure.
Some SNP politicians have talked about settled wills before, so perhaps go and ask them.
We certainly will. We've got just somebody on the programme next week. Anna Sarwar, thank you very much indeed for being here. We will speak to you again very soon, I'm sure. Right, time now to speak to the Scottish Conservative leader, Douglas Ross, in the next of our leader interviews. There he is. Morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show, Mr. Ross.
Morning.
Crikey, we've got a very, very long delay on this line. That's not going to make things easy, but let's persevere. Here is my opening question. I just want to find out how you're thinking at the moment. Are you one of those Conservatives who thinks you are braced for a Labour landslide at this election, or are you one of those optimistic, sunlit uplands Tories who reckons you can still manufacture a win from somewhere?
Well, I'm determined to get as much support as possible for the Scottish Conservatives here in Scotland. In key seats up and down the country, people have heard from our candidates over the last few weeks and will continue to hear from them in the final couple of weeks of this campaign about the positive vision we have locally and nationally in focusing on the issues that really matter to people, such as the NHS, improving educational standards, getting the infrastructure we need in the south of Scotland and up here in the north east, cutting people's taxes, putting a priority on our police officers, making sure they have the support they need to keep our communities safe. So all of these issues are the priorities for the Scottish Conservatives that we're speaking about in this campaign, in stark contrast with the SNP, who will obsess about independence and try to separate Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom again.
OK, how do you reckon the campaign's gone so far? It started in a downpour. We had the D-Day retreat. We had your resignation in the middle of it all, and now we've got a betting scandal, which is growing again this morning. I see another of your senior Tory colleagues is being investigated in that.
It has been very difficult, and I'm not going to shy away from that, Martin. I put myself forward today for this interview, knowing that a number of these issues will come up. But I'm also out on doors, speaking to voters here in the North East and across the country, and hearing that they are so annoyed, upset and disappointed with an SNP government that's been in charge here for 17 years. And that's why we are seeing record waits in our A&E departments. People can't get an appointment with a GP. They're seeing their schools that their kids or their grandkids go to falling down international rankings. All of these issues are coming up time and time again on the doorstep, and people know in key seats up and down the country they can vote for a Scottish Conservative to focus on these priorities, or they can end up with an SNP MP who will be obsessed about independence because they made that the entire first page of their manifesto.
OK, have you spoken to them at all about your kind of job insurance policy? If you don't win the seat you're standing for, you're going to stay on as an MSP, you say. Is that really tenable? And if it is, what does it say about how you view the Scottish Parliament in comparison to Westminster? It's very much your plan B, isn't it?
Well, I'm determined to win this seat in Aberdeenshire North and Murray East, but as we heard at the top of your programme, this is on a knife edge here. People can either unite behind me and elect a Scottish Conservative MP who will be focused on their real priorities, or they can end up with an SNP MP who wants to separate Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom, and they believe their independence obsession trumps everything else, like improving our NHS, like focusing on education, like growing the economy. So I am very clear that that's the option here and in many key seats across the country.
Okay.
But on the proposal with Holyrood, I want to be a representative politician. I've done that since I was first elected back in 2007.
Right, it's at this point I should say that a list of all the candidates standing for election in your seat is available on the BBC website. I want to move away, actually, from talking about constituency matters, because we mustn't do this. This is an interview about your party, your leadership and the bigger picture in this election. Isn't the big problem for your party in this election that you could promise anything in your manifesto and people just simply don't trust the Conservatives anymore?
No, I think what you've seen from the UK manifesto and you'll see from the Scottish manifesto I'm launching tomorrow, it's a programme to deliver for people here in the North East, right across Scotland, over the next 5 years. It's focusing on the issues that come up time and time again, and I've spoken with our candidates in every part of Scotland and they're getting the same feedback on the doorstep. People are fed up with the SNP, who have ignored many parts of the country. They have prioritised their obsession with independence, and that's why we have issues in our NHS, in our education system. It's
right.
why people are saying...
There's a delay, but I'm going to cut across you there, because I don't want to talk to you about the SNP. I want to talk to you about the Conservative Party, your manifesto, your policies. The one that's probably got the most attention in this campaign, and Rishi Sunak doesn't seem too upset about it, because he says it's going down very well on the doorsteps, to the surprise of many, is national service. He was asked about that in this Question Time interview on Thursday night, and he said there would be sanctions for 18-year-olds who don't step up. He said something about driving licences and access to money, but when he was asked for detail, he either couldn't or wouldn't give any more. Do you know what sanctions there will be for 18-year-olds who don't volunteer for this national service system?
Well, the proposal that the Prime Minister put forward, and I think we've already spoken about it on this programme, is for a Royal Commission to be set up, and I think that's the right thing to do. The detail of this will be worked out over some time, taking on board the views
he
of
mentioned
Civic
a couple of
Scotland,
specifics. Do you know any more detail about
and
those?
across the political system. Well, what I know is that the commitment in the manifesto is for a Royal Commission to be set up to look at the issues and also to look at how this operates in other countries around Europe, because as you know, Martin, this is already up and running to varying different degrees elsewhere in Europe. So I think it's important that we learn from that.
What do you reckon appropriate sanctions would be for an 18-year-old who didn't want to participate in this for whatever reason?
Well, I think we've also got to look at the opportunities with this as well, Martin. This is giving people the chance to learn more about a sector that they may wish to go in. It's giving people an opportunity to
No, I'm asking about, we've had that
in
conversation
in
previously,
if
Mr. Ross.
It's the right choice for them or not.
The Prime Minister has moved this discussion on to sanctions, and he specifically listed a couple. Access to money, which will really worry certainly families, 18-year-olds, whatever, who are of an age where this is going to be significant to them, and access to their driving licences. If you don't know more about those two specifics that he mentioned, what do you think an appropriate sanction might be to an 18-year-old who doesn't want to step up?
Well, I think it's absolutely right that the Commission looks at all this. They look at the opportunities, they look at these issues, and they come up with proposals to bring back to Parliament, to the various different political parties, and to the public. That's the right way to approach this, to not go out of the gates early on and say it should be this or that the Commission looks at all the detail, listens and learns, and then comes up with proposals. That's the way Royal Commissions operate.
All right, let's move on then. Let's look at the issue of immigration. I was just discussing it with Anas Sarwar. Economic growth, every party seems to agree, is at the crux of what's going to help us in the future. That's the way forward. Nobody wants to say they're going to tax more. Nobody wants to say they're going to cut more. Everybody says we're going to grow the economy. Nobody really seems to give any specific details as to how. But immigration seems to have worked pretty well over the past few years. Certainly, according to this report I was talking to Mr. Sarwar about from the Resolution Foundation think tank. Do you agree Scotland needs more people to boost its workforce?
Well, there are sectors where we obviously rely on immigrants to come in and help and support the workforce, but there's a huge problem at the moment with record migration into the United Kingdom that is not flowing up to Scotland, and there's serious questions that have to be answered about why people are not coming to this part of the United Kingdom when there are record numbers coming in. But we've also got to look at illegal migration as well, and I think we have seen huge numbers of people making these illegal crossings, putting their own lives at risk, and we've got to have a deterrent in place.
We're going to come. No. We're going to come to that in a minute, Mr. Ross. Forgive me for cutting in here. I don't want to do this every time, especially with this delay. But I do want to talk to you about illegal migration. But firstly, I want to talk to you about the economic boost of legal migration, because the Resolution Foundation have dug into the numbers and they've assessed that. I mean, you've told me many times in this programme, right, that our economy has grown faster than many others, than Japan, than Germany, and so on and so on. And actually, they're saying we're bang average, apart from one thing, the numbers of immigrants who've come in on working visas and paid tax and boosted our economy. And here we are. You've done that because you've granted those visas, and it's worked. It's grown the economy. But here we are with an election looming, and you say you're going to cut that. The one thing that's demonstrably helping things is going. Why is that?
Well, no, we're looking at illegal migration and the situation with
I'm
people
asking you
coming
about
into this
visas
country
for
illegally.
working
But you also
migration.
said, Martin, that no parties are coming forward. And you also said no parties are coming forward with plans to grow the economy. There is more than one way to grow the economy. Indeed, there are many ways to grow the economy, as I outlined in our
But you're going to cut the one that's working.
Grasping the Thistle. There are many ways that we can make sure. Well, as I say, there are many ways we can make sure we grow the economy here in Scotland, and we have to, because of course the SNP haven't taken a grip of this issue in their entire time in government, and Scotland's economy is more sluggish than the rest of the United Kingdom. So we have to look at opportunities that we have here in Scotland right now with the powers that we have as a very powerful devolved administration to grow Scotland's economy. And the Scottish Conservatives have put forward those plans, and we will continue to do so, because it's going to be absolutely crucial to deliver the public services that people here in Scotland want and deserve.
Would you accept, just in a word, would you accept that the Resolution Foundation are right when they're saying that bringing more people in on working visas has increased the tax base and has helped the economy grow? Yes or no, is that a fair analysis?
Yes, that is a fair analysis.
So why does your party want to cut that number?
Illegal and legal migration. Because we've got to look at this whole situation in the round, and there are also record numbers coming into the United Kingdom, and that has gone up hugely in the last few years. So we have to tackle migration in the round, and
But
we've got to look at all of the situations, not just one element of this. Well, Scotland's economy under the SNP is more sluggish than any other part of the United Kingdom, so we've got to look at the implications of that as well.
All right, why not grant Scottish-specific visas to let this system that has worked so well have an impact here in Scotland? If there are concerns in the south and that's costing votes or whatever the reason is for cutting this thing, why not just create a system that allows people to come here, settle here and work here? We've seen it work over the UK as a whole. What's the problem with creating a system, it's not difficult to achieve, that would allow it to work here in Scotland?
Well, the issues are not just held by people in the south. People watching vulnerable individuals making that perilous crossing across the channel want to see
different
action.
issue. I'm not going to let you go there. That's completely different. I'm talking about visaed people, not people on boats. We'll come to them in a minute.
Well, you mentioned the south of England and that issue, so I was responding to that point. But in terms of the Scotland-specific issue, we have had specific schemes to benefit individuals, businesses and sectors here in Scotland. The UK government has looked at that and has addressed that and has set up schemes where that has been appropriate. But I also think you would expect me to say there is an issue where people are not attracted to come to Scotland despite record numbers coming into the United Kingdom. So what can we do here in Scotland? Well, we can make sure that Scotland is not the highest tax part of the United Kingdom, as it has been under the SNP, and we can make sure that our public services here in Scotland deliver for people. So we don't see our minor injuries unit shut down overnight. We don't make it so difficult for people to see a GP. We don't see our schools failing to deliver for pupils because our educational standards are plummeting down international rankings. We can do an awful lot with the powers we have here in Scotland if we didn't have a Scottish government who were obsessed with independence.
OK, let's move to illegal migration then, the small boats. You have been on this programme many times in the past and told me that you support the Rwanda policy. Do you still support it now, even though we know it has demonstrably failed in its main purpose of deterring people from coming across the channel? Record numbers. More than 12,000 people have crossed so far this year, up on the previous 2 years. It's failed.
Well, the scheme is just beginning and it is acting as a deterrent, and it's important it does so. And I know you've tried to cut me off before.
In what way is it acting as a deterrent? There are more people coming than there were before.
This does act as a deterrent because we have seen that it has put people off coming across that channel, that dangerous crossing. What we're now seeing is the people traffickers seeking to circumvent that by putting more people in boats, which is why we are seeing, sadly, greater numbers of fatalities. But we have to continue to make sure that vulnerable people are not forced into these awful journeys.
I don't understand your logic. How have people been put off if more of them are coming?
And sadly, those who don't make it. Well, as I was saying, Martin, this scheme is just getting operational now. It has only recently passed the various phases in the UK Parliament, both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. There was obviously a legal challenge which delayed it as well. But we have to ensure that we make it as difficult as possible for illegal people traffickers to focus on the vulnerable seeking to cross the channel, because the only people that benefit out of this are these people traffickers who are breaking the law and seeking to exploit vulnerable people for huge sums of money, and ultimately it sadly ends up in the deaths of too many of these vulnerable people.
Yeah, let me ask you about Brexit. There is a poll out today, it's on the front page of The Observer, suggesting 56% of voters now believe Brexit's been bad for the UK's economy as a whole. Only 12% believe it's been economically beneficial. It's 8 years since the Brexit vote. Did Britain make the wrong decision?
Well, it was up to the people across Britain, and the people of Britain decided to leave the European Union. And I think when you give people an opportunity to express their views, you have to respect it. That's why I was confident in 2014 when we agreed to stay part of the United Kingdom. That would be respected. But of course, it never has been, because for the last 10 years, we've had a decade of division as the SNP have sought to agitate for another referendum. So the people were asked to decide in 2016 if they supported remaining in the European Union or supported leaving, and the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave.
Yeah, but with the benefit of hindsight, was that the wrong decision? That was my question.
Well, it's a mandate delivered by the people of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, but did they get the decision wrong? Now we know what has happened to the economy. It's a simple question.
To vote in that. Look, there have been challenges with leaving the European Union, but there have also been opportunities with leaving the European Union. But ultimately, if you go to the polls, if you ask people to give a choice in a referendum where there was two opportunities to either stay or leave, you respect that choice. And sadly, we've only seen that with one of the referendums we had a number of years ago. The Brexit referendum has been implemented. The choice of the people has been respected. Where the people of Scotland chose to stay part of the United Kingdom, the SNP have not respected that. And indeed, earlier on the Laura Kuenssberg show today, John Swinney had this arrogant approach that it doesn't matter what happens in elections, the SNP will continue to agitate for independence. And that's why it's so important in key seats across the country that voters unite behind the Scottish Conservatives to stop the SNP, beat them in these seats, and finally end their obsession with independence.
Right. So if, as the polls suggest, you lose this election, will you stop believing in smaller government and a free market economy?
No, this is a representative election seeking a parliament for the next 5 years. That's a different
It's the keystone of their belief, of their political beliefs. It's what they stand for.
The future. But it's getting in the way of everything they do. They have been elected to govern Scotland and manage our NHS, our economy, our education system, the police service. All of these issues have been ignored and neglected by an SNP government obsessed about independence. They have taken their eye off the ball on so many key issues. They've even accepted that themselves. So people will know if they vote for nationalists in this election, they will get more SNP politicians who are obsessed with independence rather than those who are focused on the issues that really matter to people.
Well, that's very much up to them, isn't it? And they can choose how they cast their vote. They know what they'll get, as you say. Let me ask you the same question I asked Sarwar just a minute or two ago on independence. Do you think this is a voluntary union that we are in, a union that each party should be able to leave if they express that desire?
Yes, and they had the opportunity to do that in 2014. That's proof positive that this is a voluntary union. But in 2014, the two governments worked together to come up with what was described as a gold standard of a referendum. That was the words of the SNP at the time. They agreed the date, the franchise and the prospectus for that referendum, but they also agreed it would be a once-in-a-generation opportunity and the people's views would be respected. And of course, the SNP have never respected the views of the Scottish people to remain part of the United Kingdom. They have agitated for separation ever since, and that has been at the expense of key local and public services that people rely on because they have been neglected by the nationalists while they focus on separation.
So we are no longer able to get out of this union, even if we want to. We've had our chance.
Well, we chose to stay part of the United Kingdom. We chose to remain a strong, integral part of the United Kingdom. And I'm proud we chose that opportunity to continue to be part of the United Kingdom.
So we don't get another chance? Or do we get another chance? I don't understand. When might we get another chance? Even if the people vote overwhelmingly in support of pro-independence parties, we don't get another go at it because this happened 10 years ago. Or when might it happen again? What's the democratic route out now?
Well, what I'm saying, Martin, is we were told by the SNP that this would be a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And the problem with them continually agitating for more referendums until they get the result that they agree with and they want, they would finally give up then. That's not democracy. That's not saying we'll keep having referendums until we win, because who loses out of that? Scotland loses. Scotland's business community doesn't have the assurance to invest going forward. The people of Scotland are living in this perpetual uncertainty as well. well. I think what we need is to focus on the issues that really matter, that can be improved right now if we didn't have SNP politicians obsessing about independence.
OK, but just to be clear, this isn't voluntary. We're stuck in this union for now because there's no way out of it because we've had our go. Yeah?
We had an opportunity to express our view, which both sides agreed they would respect,
that's clear.
And one side has not.
OK. Listen, I was asking you about Brexit a minute ago. Last time you were on this programme, I asked you whether you would stay in the Conservative Party if Nigel Farage became the leader. You laughed at that prospect when I raised it. I think we might have had a bet on it or something, kind of shaking hands on it. Are you still laughing at that prospect now? Because it looks a little more real, does it not?
Yes, I am, and hopefully that's coming across in this broadcast. Nigel Farage is seeking to get votes from the Conservative Party. He is an opposition party leader. He doesn't have a place in the Conservative Party, but what he risks doing here in Scotland is letting the SNP in, because in key seats, a vote for reform will simply let the SNP in the back door. And I think people are becoming more and more aware of that and the risk that they will wake up on the 5th of July with an SNP politician, because reform votes have allowed that to happen. So people need to know that a vote for reform here in Scotland, a vote for any other party in key seats up and down the country, or not voting at all, could lead to people not having a Scottish Conservative focused on their issues. They would end up with an SNP politician obsessed with independence.
Are you worried about that? Are you worried about reform? I mean, as you say, in constituencies across the country that the Conservatives are targeting, just, you know, a few hundred votes for reform might tip it in favour of the SNP, and they're polling quite well. Does that kind of keep you awake?
Well, that is an issue, and I think that's an issue that we are putting across to people on the doorsteps, that a vote for reform will help the SNP. There's not a single opinion poll that has got the Reform Party anywhere close to winning a seat anywhere in Scotland, but they can help the SNP get in, and I don't think people want that in many of the key seats. They want a Scottish Conservative who will focus on their issues, not an SNP politician who will potentially be enabled into that role by some people voting reform. So that is a risk, and people are aware of that, and I think they will bear that in mind when they go to the polling station on the 4th of July.
Yeah, I mean, people are talking about this election as potentially being an extinction-level event for the Conservative Party. I know you're going to tell me that, you know, the only poll that matters is on the 4th of July and all that, and you're absolutely right in that. But in your quiet moments, do you worry about the future of your party, where it might go? If there's just a rump left and it's pulled to the right, are you concerned about what happens to the Tories the day after?
Well, to show sometimes I do listen to you, Martin, what I would say is the only poll that matters is on the 4th of July. Not a single vote has been counted yet, and I think it is important that in this final couple of weeks of the campaign, we continue with our strong message here in Scotland, and that's in key seats up and down the country. If people don't want a nationalist obsessed with independence, they can unite behind a Scottish Conservative who will deliver for
You've said that many times.
And be a strong representative for their community.
Let me ask you one really interesting question. When did you last speak to David Duckett?
We've messaged back and forth.
How's he doing? And how, are the messages cordial, convivial, terse?
Well, as we can see from his social media, he is doing a bit more on social media now, and he's making improvements, and that's what everyone wants. We want to ensure, obviously, he's been in hospital since April. He's still getting excellent care down in Glasgow, and we want to ensure that his recovery continues. That's the most important thing.
Have you actually spoken to him? Never mind messages or social media.
Well, the messaging has been to arrange when it's OK for David to be able to speak. I hope we're able to do that. But I'm going to respect his right to, you know, focus on his recovery, to focus on getting better. And I want to see David making that full recovery that we all want to see.
Very briefly, he reckons he's been very badly treated by the party that you lead. Is he right?
Well, I understand David wanted to stand in this outstanding seat that I'm in today. I understand and respect that, but a decision was taken by the management board, and they want to focus, as we all do, on David's recovery, his rehabilitation, and to make sure he can, first of all, get out of hospital as quickly as possible, get back up here to the northeast and make a full recovery. Douglas
Ross, many thanks indeed for being with us on the Sunday Show, and I say once again, a full list of candidates for that seat and all the others is available on the BBC website. Thank you all for your time this morning. If you're watching us on the telly, this is where you leave us. I'll be back, same time, same place next week here on the Sunday Show.